Pastor Wanzell here, and I got to be honest with you, I am super excited because this is one of my favorite days of the year. It is Father's Day, and before I do anything else, I want to make sure that I tell every father that is listening to this message a happy Father's Day. I want to bid you that right now because we don't hear it enough. And if you haven't heard it today so far, I want to make sure that I'm the first to let you know, happy Father's Day. I've got a few points that I want to talk through today. If you don't mind, let's go to the book of Mark, chapter 9, verse 14, the NIV version. Mark, chapter 9, verse 14, the NIV version. Man, I know we don't typically take notes, but today I just want you to write down every point so you have it. Wives, put some pressures on your husband to make sure he's taking notes today. Back in April, ESPN released a docuseries entitled The Last Dance, detailing the career of the greatest player to ever play the game of basketball. We don't debate that. Michael Jordan. Within the series, you learn that Michael Jordan has several rivals throughout his career, and one of those rivals was a player by the name of Karl Malone. Excuse me. In the 1996-97 season, Karl Malone was given the MVP, the most valuable player of the NBA. Even though Michael Jordan, that same year, led the league in scoring, his team had the best record in the league. And his team, the Bulls, beat the Utah Jazz for the NBA Finals. And one could wonder, it's very controversial, but one could wonder, how is it that a man who wasn't the best, a man who lost to the best, gets the MVP? And when I started to look into it and dive into that year for the Utah Jazz, I learned that that season for them was their best season ever. It still stands as a franchise record. They went 64-18. And despite all of his opponents, despite Michael Jordan being much better than him, despite Michael Jordan's team being better than his team, somehow, some way, Karl Malone was deemed the MVP. And here's why I believe it was so. Karl Malone developed into the player that his team needed him to be so that they could reach their highest heights and reach levels that they never thought they could reach. They set a franchise record. And what I pulled from that was that I don't have to be the best to be the MVP. And I don't have to make the most money. I don't have to be the most articulate. I don't have to be the most masculine to be the MVP for my family. And here's what I want to get at today. Any man that functions as the priest, protector, and provider of his home, regardless of what society has reduced us down to, regardless if the kids don't show you the respect that you think you need, regardless if your wife has even told you these things, in God's eyes, you're the MVP. And I wanted to make sure that I told you that today, because oftentimes we hear everything that's being talked about on the news. We don't necessarily feel the respect that we think that is due to the man that stands in his office. But I want you to understand today that if you're functioning as the priest, protector, and provider of your home, God sees you as the MVP. You don't have to be the most articulate. You don't have to be the best. You don't have to be the breadwinner of your family. He says, listen, if you stand the way that I tell you to stand, you're the MVP. So there's four things I want to talk about from this story that I love in Scripture. Let's go to verse 14. Four things that I think an MVP does. Four things that I think an MVP does. Let's read at verse 14. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. What are you arguing with them about? He asked. A man in the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of his speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. You unbelieving generation, Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. The first point that I have for you today, please write this down, is that an MVP, he speaks for his family. I'll say that again. An MVP, he speaks for his family. One of the most common mistakes I think that we make as men is oftentimes thinking that as long as we lead, As long as we stand as the head of household of our families, that is us leading our family. What I want you to understand from this point is that the power to impact and influence our family comes from our ability to speak on the behalf of our family. Not just our ability to lead our family, but to speak on the behalf of our family. This unnamed man brings his son to Jesus' disciples. And they couldn't fix him. Jesus is at this time is up on the mountain, and when he gets down, there's this big commotion, and he gets down there, and Jesus says to the scribes, and he says to his disciples, "What are you guys arguing about?" And this man speaks up and says, "I brought my son to you, and your disciples couldn't fix him." Now, here's what I want you to understand. The man led his son. He led his son to the right place. But if he didn't speak up for his son would have never gotten healed. And you have to understand that coupled with your leadership and the position that you hold, you have to have the courage to speak to God, speak to Jesus on the behalf of your family. Any man that speaks on the behalf of his family, God pays attention to that. Everything that was going on, this man speaks up and says, "Listen, I brought my son. I led him here." But he speaks up on the behalf of his son to ensure that his son gets the healing that he was looking for. Point number one, he speaks for his family. Let's go to point number two. Let's look at verse 17. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought my son who was possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of his speech. Whenever it seizes him and throws him to the ground, he foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "You unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." Point number two is this. He seeks Jesus. An MVP seeks Jesus. I honestly believe that when this man rolled out of the bed that morning and he woke his son to tell him that we was going to get some healing for him, he didn't have a destination. He was looking for a person. Here's why I believe that. The man brings his son for healing, and Jesus is not at the place where he thought he was going to be. And because he understood that the disciples were an extension of Jesus, he says, "Well, you guys go ahead and have a shot at it," and they don't heal him. And for me, if the only thing that this man was looking for was healing, or he wanted his situation to be fixed, after it failed, he would have left. But he stands there and he waits for Jesus to come down the hill, and he says to Jesus, "Jesus, I brought my son to you." He doesn't leave after it. He doesn't walk away after the failure takes place. He understands that I'm seeking Jesus. I'm bringing my son to Jesus. It's almost like when you go to the barbershop and your barber's not there. I mean, I'm at the barbershop, but Bob, you can't cut my hair today, sir. I'm waiting on my guy. You get what I'm saying? I'm here for a specific person. And I think a lot of times men walk away after it fails. And what I want you to understand is that you've got to be able to get your situation in front of the one who can fix it. That's point number two. Point number two is he seeks Jesus. Let's go to number three. You unbelieving generation, verse 19. "You unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into convulsions. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. Point number three is that he stays focused. Point number three, he stays focused. After the man speaks up, he instructs the crowd to bring the boy to him. Jesus says, "Bring the boy to me." And as soon as the thing inside of the boy sees Jesus, it starts to cut up. I mean, it starts, throwing him to the ground. He's convulsing. He is rolling on the ground, doing all these different things. It starts to cut up as soon as it sees Jesus. As soon as the father and the father's issue gets close to Jesus, the issue starts to cut up. What I want you to see in that is that anything that you're dealing with that you bring close to Jesus will start to cut up with a very intentional purpose. And here's what I want to get at. Because the enemy knows that men are fixers at nature, he'll make sure that the thing starts cutting up so that you will put your hands on it, so that you take your focus off the one who can fix it. And this is the way that I wrote this down. You cannot afford to band-aid something that needs Jesus healing. You cannot afford to band-aid something that needs Jesus healing. Listen, I think a lot of times we feel that we need to put our hands on it. I mean, once it gets close to Jesus, even when we get to church sometimes, we're dealing with things and stuff that's on our heart, and it'll start to cut up. The marriage is getting worse, and the finances are extremely difficult, and the pressures at my job are starting to heat up, and it'll start to cut up because it knows that you just brought it close to Jesus. And what I want to tell you today is that you've got to stay focused. You don't want to fix it. I don't want to band-aid it. I want him to fix it. Let's push. I got to hurry up. I got 4 points today. Let me recap real quick. Number 1 was he speaks for his family. Number 2, he seeks Jesus. Number 3, he stays focused. And let's go for number 4. Verse 21. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From a child," he answered. Verse 22. "It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him." Listen, this thing wants to destroy it. It wants to destroy my son. It wants to kill my son. He says, "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus, "everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." Point number 4, he steps up. Point number 4 is he steps up. In conversation, and I love Jesus for this, in conversation, the word made flesh engages this man in the conversation. And this thing starts to cut up, and Jesus doesn't even give it a notice. He doesn't even look, he doesn't do anything. He just says, "How long has he been like this?" And he keeps this man engaged in the conversation. And through the conversation and us not going to fix the issue, something is exposed about the man, is that the man has a weakness. So Jesus continues to talk, and he says to Jesus, "Well, help us." "Well, I thought you brought your son for help." He says, help us. And then Jesus says to him, "Well, it's not an if I can help you. It's not an if with me." And I want you to understand, he says, "Not an if with me." He says, "I'm the greatest. I'm the best. I can do anything. But if you can believe," watch this now, "you can be the MVP for your family." He says, all you have to do is believe, and you will take your family to a new level, a new destination. And what I want to tell you today is that an MVP steps up when it comes to him believing for his family. Listen to me. I think these 4 points are extremely powerful. And I pray that this word has blessed you the way that it has blessed me. I had to question some things in myself when I was going through this message. So what I want you to do is repost this, send this to every man that you know. And while you're doing that, make sure you tell them Happy Father's Day. God bless you, and I hope to see you soon.